Dawn in the Arctic is a welcome but cunning gift. The warmth of a new day bathes the landscape, but fails to penetrate a land frozen since the beginning of time. On the surface, life seems impossible here, except in one extraordinary place where the laws of nature appear suspended. Isolated, far above the tree line, there exists a strange and wonderful quirk of climate and geography, found only by following the great river called Thelon. Breathing life into bedrock, the Thelon River is the divine instigator of a place that seduces with stark allure. Here there is habitat and opportunity for a biological drama to be played out on an enchanting, yet unforgiving stage. It is a rare land of spirit and dreams, an infinitely rich sanctuary known as the place where God began. Hunched on the broad right shoulder of North America, between Great Slave Lake and Hudson Bay, the Thelon River Basin is an island of green surrounded by a vast emptiness called, for good reason, the Barrens. Larger than continental Europe, the Barrens still exhibit the parallel scars of ancient, retreating glaciers. This is Arctic desert. Less precipitation falls here than on the Sahara, yet water, as far as the eye can see, is another of nature's cunning tricks. 6 inches below a thin mantle of mossy tundra hide, permafrost and bedrock retains the runoff, creating a bog 5 million square kilometers in size. But the greatest trick of all is played upon the Barrens by the Thelon River. Working its way through layers of softer sandstone on the granite bones of the Canadian Shield, the unceasing power of fresh water has transformed this desert, forging an expansive, sheltered valley. Slowly, through the course of time, the river's magical moving ways have created a life-inspiring Boreal Oasis. Adventuresome species, animal and human, have been drawn to this river basin, rich with patterns of life found nowhere else on the planet and should not exist here. So far north, so many trees. The tempering of land and sky by the river has created a unique, harmonious ecosystem where boreal and Arctic species coexist, side by side. This blending of opportunities for plants and animals to adapt to the harsh, dry extremes of the north and the more lush, predictable forest to the south is one of nature's rarest combinations. Only in the Thelon has the moose found its way onto the barrens. Traveling from tree pocket to tree pocket, they finally discovered this unlikely haven, far beyond the northern limits of their range. But now that they're here, it's difficult to go back. Not so for the caribou. Every year the Beverly herd, 400,000 strong, migrates north, followed closely by roving packs of predators and scavengers. Virtually every species here is linked to the caribou's cycle of life. Returning to this isolated natural commonwealth to regenerate their species, give birth, and mature quickly. The siren's call of the Thelon whispers, and the musk ox answers. Stoic, resilient, a sentinel at Eden's gate, the musk ox prevails as one of the Thelon's few year-round residents, a symbol of adaptation and survival in one of the world's most precarious environments. People, First Peoples, have also heeded Thelon's call, tracking and harvesting caribou for millennia. This land is as sacred as it is home. While others, like John Hornby, one of many to lay claim to the discovery of this land, have failed to respect the power of nature and paid dearly for it. Here, the harshest laws in nature offer only the smallest window of opportunity for life. Yet, this same unforgiving character has also inspired one of the richest constellations of life found on Earth. The Thelon is one of nature's special places, where nothing, it seems, is impossible. The lengthening days of April and May, and the strength of a returning sun, brings back the birds, warms the earth, and wakes the bugs. Down in the valley, making his way past the remnants of winter's debris, the muskox is Thelon's perpetual welcome mat to the returning harbingers of spring. Year-round residency in the Thelon is a remarkable feat. The kiviot of the muskox, underhair warmer than cashmere, and the thick white down of the ptarmigan allows them to endure winter temperatures that can plunge to minus 60 degrees centigrade. The first ground laid bare, by trapping the heat of the returning sun, are the southern slopes of Eskers. Spring ptarmigan, foraging for the first green shoots of a new season, mimic the land's transformation, shifting in color from ivory to the speckled hues of granite and sandstone. Ordered mounds of sand and gravel, deposited 10,000 years ago by torrents of meltwater snaking beneath the receding ice, Eskers are flush with habitat and the potential for life. Sometimes it only takes the nitrogen-rich droppings of a passing animal or nesting bird to add the nutrients necessary to sustain new growth. To avoid destruction from the savage blasts of windstorms, black spruce and other conifers eke out a humble existence by grasping the esker sand, often looking more like a ground-hugging shrub than an evergreen tree. Tucked safely inside a dwarf birch as old as Canada, white merlin nestlings are invisible inside their esker home. Nearby, Mother Merlin watches closely, from treetops or river updrafts, for lemmings and ground squirrels, to feed and nurture her young. Eskers are ideal denning sites for both the Arctic wolf and fox. The deep, warm sands of southern slopes offer sanctuary for a precious litter of 3 healthy, dusty fox kits. Only a few weeks old, they've already grown a thick, winter-ready coat of fur. The 22-hour days of spring are filled with the serious business of growing up and learning fox ways quickly, while their parents often leave the den unguarded for long periods of time to scavenge enough food to fill 3 hungry bellies. The river, too, offers unique habitat. Ledges carved into sandstone cliffs become eyries for golden eagles, peregrine, gyre falcons, and other migrant raptors lured to Thelon country from the south. The most surprising of all river dwellers found here, country surrounded by open tundra, is Canada's beloved rodent, the beaver. Nature says it's impossible for beaverdom to exist this far north. Yet here they are. As spring turns quickly to summer, plants flower and seed, and young animals mature at amazing rates. The fledgling Arctic tern is mobile almost at birth, and in no time at all is learning to hover and dive as only terns can. In a few short weeks it will leave, to fly halfway around the world to South Georgia or Antarctica. With luck, it will return home to Thelon to bear its own young in years to come. And so it goes, each in its own turn. Life is renewed in the birthplace called Thelon. It is a land well suited to its nurturing role, and animals are drawn here for good reasons. But never forget, this is not an easy place to live. This season, a moose cow is without calf. Perhaps the winter was too harsh, the temperatures too cold, thicket snow too deep to reach willow branches. Perhaps this year, her cycle will be renewed. Since time began, the Thelon's binding force has been the caribou. Barren ground caribou. The Beverly herd. Each spring, 400,000 strong, they migrate north from the tree line, across the open tundra, to their calving grounds northeast of the river. Then, like a tide of life, flowing with a natural rhythm that is played out year after year after year, they pour into the Thelon River Valley on their return journey south. The Beverly herd is the lifeblood of the Thelon. Moving, always moving, their massive numbers add a living, liquid presence to the landscape. Their cycle of life is a dance between prey and predator, each making the other strong. Without the caribou, the large carnivores, the bear, wolf, wolverine, and man, would starve. Out on the barrens, or here in the Thelon, peaceful coexistence is a relative thing, one moment by moment, in the fullness of life. Arctic wolves, tracking the Beverly herd north from the tree line, are the predatory partners of the barren ground caribou. In a biological truce worked out in the fullness of evolutionary time, in late spring, wolves stop the hunt to den and give birth, while the caribou continue north to their own calving grounds. Like the fox, Arctic wolves take full advantage of the Thelon's dry, sun-baked eskers to dig their dens, and by May, they're ready to deliver their cubs. As caribou calves mature, and the herd begins its march toward the river valley, wolf cubs are also growing and learning the ways of the hunt. By the time the cubs are weaned, the caribou have returned, and the dance of prey and predator continues. For the caribou, bloodletting and internally burrowing insects are the lethal dark scourge of Eden. Water, however cold, brings short-term relief. But they can't swim forever, and still need to gain weight and strength to survive the approaching winter. The next best thing is to gather on sand flats along the river and hope the constant Thelon winds keep the hungry bugs at bay.
My Father, you have told me that heaven is very beautiful. Tell me now one thing more. Is it more beautiful than the country of the caribou in summer?
The caribou has defined this place, and two founding peoples as well, the Chippewayan Dene to the west, and the Caribou Inuit to the east. They are also a part of nature's rhythm, like the caribou, wolf, and all other Thelon creatures. Even today, walk to any point of prospect, anywhere in the river basin, and there will be flakes of rock to be found, where hunters once sat chipping stone points in anticipation of the hunt. For the Dene and Inuit, connection to the land was through the food it provided. Knowing its rhythms meant a secure source of fresh meat in each and every season, to be dried and cached for leaner times. Throughout the generations, children learned about this land and its creator through the natural events in their daily lives, and still do. The Inuit of Hudson Bay moved into Thelon from the west, to river crossings that, if the land was willing, provided caribou meat for food, bones and antlers for tools, and hides for clothing, shelter, and hoop drums to help them sing stories during long winter nights. But to the Inuit, Thelon also meant wood, a scarce material on the barrens and almost as valuable as the caribou. Without it, they could not build their kayaks and sleds, or raise their tents. For the first people of the Thelon, the annual migration of the great caribou herds was the gift of life and a sacred connection to their homeland. Like the Thelon itself, it is a special bond that endures. The Thelon is the best of both worlds. For the rich diversity of birds and animals that return here every summer, it is forest and tundra, nourishment and nesting. A place to be, a place to coexist in the chain of sacrifice, a place of new beginnings. For the musk ox, that strange genetic combination of mountain sheep and goat, life's routine is an uneasy alliance with the weather and running predators like the wolf. Each muskox herd is a hierarchy, ruled by the strongest, most hard-headed bull. He has exclusive mating rights with all females in the herd, a right defended by banishing weaker males to a lonely, solitary existence. But true to the challenging nature of the Thelon, defiant males always return to test the strength and resolve of the dominant bull. This time, nothing more than a brief chase discourages the challenger from butting heads. But only a century ago, an ominous challenge appeared in the Thelon to which the muskox had no defense. By the beginning of the 19th century, the beaver and buffalo had been hunted to the edge of extinction in southern Canada. Fur traders and white hunters inevitably looked north and were drawn by the siren's call to the Thelon. Muskox are not migrants, making them easy prey year-round. Their thick, luxurious hides were ideal for use on Europe's horse-drawn carriages. And like most valuable, now extinct creatures, demand exceeded supply. Soon the muskox of the Thelon had almost disappeared. Ironically, their savior was a white man by the name of John Hornby. In the winter of 1924, an expedition was mounted to Thelon country, and Hornby, a former British Air Force pilot and northern adventurer, joined on to study habitat, wildlife, and hunting in the north. Saddened by the experience, when Hornby returned home, he wrote a report to the Canadian government, setting in motion the creation of a wildlife sanctuary to protect all creatures inside its borders. Hornby's action saved the muskox, but as it turned out, he could not save himself from the call of the Thelon. One year later, in the summer of 1926, Hornby convinced his cousin, Edgar Christian, a proper English schoolboy, to seek his fortune in Canada along with Uncle Jack. Together they paddled down the Athabasca and Slave Rivers to Great Slave Lake, and then east into the Thelon Oasis. Joining in their adventure was another former Air Force pilot, Harold Adlard. Together, this unlikely threesome believed they had embarked on the challenge of a lifetime. Hornby's plan was a simple one: build a cabin, settle in, and spend the winter getting fat on caribou that passed by their front door. As misfortune would have it, the caribou never came, and as winter gripped the cabin in its teeth, their meager supplies were soon exhausted. Without food from the land, Hornby's plan began to unravel. There was simply not enough to eat. As young Edgar recorded in his diary, they were soon digging in the snow for rabbit entrails and old fish heads. Anything to stay alive. On April 17th, Hornby died of starvation. He'd gambled with the land and lost. Harold Adlard was not far behind. Too weak to bury them, Edgar wrapped their bodies in canvas and placed them outside the cabin door. His fortune in Canada long forgotten, Edgar Christian was last to perish. But before he died, he hid his diary in the stone-cold stove, where it was found along with their well-chewed skeletons 2 summers later. His last words remain, a testament to the strange lure of Thelon country.
Dear Mother, feeling weak now, can only write little. Sorry left it so late, but alas, I have struggled hard. Please don't blame dear Jack. He loves you and me only in this world. And tell no one else this, but keep it and believe.
On the 15th of June, 1927, only 59 days after John Hornby's death and long before his body was found, Canada's Governor-General of the day signed into law the creation of the Thelon Wildlife Sanctuary. Today it too remains one of the oldest and largest nature preserves in the world. By August, autumn is riding the Thelon winds while the aurora borealis dances and shimmers in a fluorescent, electric sky. Air pressure changes, winds shift, days shorten. Together they become nature's call to the musk ox. Mating season has arrived. Black crowberry, reindeer moss, Labrador tea, Arctic willow, and heather heed the seasonal shift with a symphony of color. Overnight, red, orange, and yellow explodes upon the landscape. A new ethereal beauty emerges as birdsong fades, leaving sentinel spruce in a sea of changing green. Except for the muskox, everyone and everything is now rushing to flower, mature, and stockpile enough energy to survive the looming winter. A noble peregrine falcon eyeballs one of the latest migrants from the south, a red squirrel, busily munching oil-rich spruce seeds to fill its quota. His labor may be wasted if the falcon has his way. Waterfowl gather in preparation for southern flight, their numbers swelled by the summer's reproductive successes. Adolescent tundra swans, now almost indistinguishable in size and weight from their parents, take their own cue from autumn to congregate and prepare for a long journey south. The bull moose, too, resplendent in his bullwinkle headdress, feels the tug of the changing season. An incredibly successful pioneer always stretching the bounds of its home range, the moose has only reached the Thelon, the northern limit of its possible range, in the last decade. Now is the time to challenge for a mate, then sow the seeds of life that will cycle his unique presence into the next Thelon summer. As nature preordained it, the wolf and caribou, pelage winter thick and shiny clean, pursue their strange and wonderful alliance of hunter and hunted as they head for winter sanctuary below the tree line. They too will mate, each in its own time. The caribou sooner, the wolf later in the winter, spinning their own cycles of life on for another year. Broad and strong, the Thelon River is cooling now, yet still capable of magical ways, moderating the valley and keeping the harsh cold at bay for slightly longer than the exposed, barren lands beyond the rim. The one who stays and keeps this winter house in order, the musk ox, is also in process of gathering to procreate the species. But not before one of nature's strangest displays of male posturing. In an age-old struggle, where survival of the herd truly depends on survival of the fittest, any sign of weakness in the head bull's ability to dominate provokes a challenge from males ready to test the bull's and their own strength. It is a primal battle that symbolizes the resolve of all Thelon creatures to survive in this remote Spartan refuge. The spirit of the Thelon Oasis lives in the fragile breath of the land. But as much as this spirit of place is embodied in creatures that thrive here, and in the Dene and Inuit who call Thelon home, it also resides in all people who have experienced this land on its own terms and been moved to protect one of the rarest sanctuaries for wildlife in the world. The solitary bull muskox is a symbol of the Thelon's need to survive and prevail, as it has, suspended in time and place between forest and tundra. John Hornby reaped a just reward for his arrogance in believing people know all there is to know about the patterns of nature. But consistent with this place, so full of contradictions, Hornby also set an example by speaking out for conservation, whatever the cost. The essence of the Thelon Wildlife Sanctuary, where life is born and reborn, is as special and as sacred today as it ever was. The world needs small miracles where the mysteries of nature prevail. Such is Thelon, the place where God began. technology. In the modern world, it's constantly revolutionizing the way we live. But right now, there's another revolution going on in the natural world, and it too is transforming our planet. Once impossible to imagine, today the leading edge of technology is helping to reveal how fragile and mysterious life on Earth really is. From the knife edge of extinction, to the microscopic world of inner space, to the infinity of outer space, to deep within the Earth itself, the future is wild tech. In every corner of the world, remote wild places are thriving with rare and magical forms of life. Or are they? Statistics prove that life in the wild is disappearing, and quickly. 137 species become extinct every day. 50,000 vanish forever each year. But extinction may not be inevitable. In fact, the new technology of assisted reproduction could force the threat of extinction itself to disappear. Today, zoos around the world are full of endangered species. In the past, they were all that kept many animals from disappearing completely. But in the future, they'll be protected in a completely different place. It's called the Frozen Zoo. Here, the living cells of an incredible array of wild animals are being preserved for scientists to conceive, even clone endangered species.
This is the way I think we're going to transport animals someday. Someday I see us with liquid nitrogen tanks on airplanes, literally hauling a herd of animals across the world.
Stored in liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees centigrade, tissue samples, sperm, eggs, and embryos from hundreds of animals can be kept for literally thousands of years. They may look small, but each of these containers can hold a herd of water buffalo. It's a frozen Noah's Ark.
We're now freezing not only reproductive cells, but we're freezing skin cells as we do work with cloning. And in my mind, the frozen zoo is one of the most powerful tools in assisted reproduction technology.
It may sound like science fiction, but for some animals, it's their last real chance for survival. Yet whatever reproductive technique is used, the real trick is to find each one of them a mother. Scientists are now learning which animals make good surrogate mothers for their similar but endangered cousin. Like qualifying an organ transplant donor, the surrogate must be compatible. And for animals like the lowland gorilla, time is running out. Of all assisted reproduction technologies, cloning is the cutting edge. And scientists here are working hard to improve their techniques.
The cells. These are the bongo cells, and they're from Mariah, who's our most endangered bongo, really.
We'll get started on that. We used a technique which is called interspecies cloning. And what that involves is actually taking the egg from one species and the cell from another species and combining the two to produce an embryo.
Dr. Damiani was part of the team that carried out the first successful cloning of an endangered mammal, a cow-like animal from India called the guar. Now he's trying to clone the almost extinct red-striped African bongo, using another antelope species as its surrogate mother. An attempt to clone a bongo is about to begin. DNA from bongo skin cells is being implanted into the egg of an eland antelope. In this lab, researchers must work under red lights. Daylight could cause a chemical reaction that might damage the cells and ruin the procedure.
What we're doing with the cloning process is we're making an identical copy of the animal that donated the cell. Instead of actually putting the bongo embryo back into a bongo, we can transfer the embryo into an eland.
Using a needle finer than a human hair, the bongo cell sample is inserted into the egg of the more common antelope.
And right there is the bongo cell into the eland oocyte.
A jolt of electricity is sent through the ovocyte, fusing the egg and cell into an embryo. Within a day, the cells are replicating, and it appears that a new bongo is on its way. But more likely, it will take hundreds of attempts like this one before an animal is actually born.
Ideally, we would like to transfer the bongo embryos into a bongo and then have that bongo give birth and so forth. The problem is there's so few bongos for us to work on, and rather than having that whole species go extinct, if I can put it into a common eland with the chance that a bongo calf is born healthy and then reintroduce it back to the bongo population, you know, it's kind of a last-ditch effort to save these species.
Like the African bongo or Indian guar, the world's great cats are also in danger of disappearing. So far, it's proven impossible to clone a cat. But as they perfect their techniques, scientists are identifying which cats make good surrogates. A few years ago, an endangered African wildcat kitten was born here, and its mother was a domestic house cat. Now scientists are working with other endangered cats, fertilizing their eggs in test tubes and implanting the embryos into surrogate mothers.
We're trying some of this work between lions and tigers. Now, nobody's ever done this before between lions and tigers, but since lions breed somewhat quickly in captivity, and we have large numbers of them, whereas tigers, there's some very endangered subspecies of tigers. If we could use the lioness as a surrogate for tiger embryos, then that's another step that we're trying to take.
In the human world, cloning experiments, test tube babies, even surrogate motherhood has been controversial, even scandalous. But assisted reproduction technology could save nature's most endangered animals, who for the most part were driven to extinction in the first place by humans. And if the Earth's wild places are to remain truly wild, it's now a problem only humans can solve.
Saving wildlife is going to boil down to not just one answer. Here at the Audubon Nature Institute, we have chosen to do what we do best, and that is preserve the genetic material from these animals. That's not going to save all species, but neither is saving habitat. Neither are zoos that maintain living collections of animals. It's going to take all of these solutions, I think, to indeed really save wildlife. So it's up to us, I think, with the tools and the technologies and the knowledge to be able to help save these species in any way that we can.
But once an endangered species has been saved, what next? Today, WildTech is helping the endangered whooping crane return home by teaching them a long-forgotten migration route. A few years ago, Operation Migration became famous for using ultralight aircraft to help lost birds find their way home. Their story of working with Canada geese even inspired a successful Hollywood movie. But what they did in the past was only a dress rehearsal for what they're doing now. Operation Migration's pilots are now flying with whooping cranes, teaching them a new migration route down through eastern North America to Florida. The whooping crane is North America's tallest bird, but its size became a liability, and by 1941 there were only 15 left in the world due to hunting and habitat loss. Today, despite international efforts to save them, whooping cranes are still on the edge of extinction, and most survive in captivity. In the past, biologists had a problem. They could breed and hatch new whooping cranes, even preserve their wildness by using puppets as surrogate parents. But they couldn't teach them how to migrate, a key survival strategy. New ultralight aircraft technology provided the answer.
Technology is critical to the survival of this species. If you didn't have the captive breeding centers, I don't think the population would have survived. We have the GPS navigation, we have the satellite tracking system. It couldn't be done, without that technology. And of course, the aircraft itself is, although it is an ultralight and people think of them as kind of flying lawn chairs, that they're really are state-of-the-art aircraft.
Easy to control and inexpensive to fly, ultralights are a new age solution to an age-old problem. They soar through the air like a windsurfer riding air currents and can land or take off almost anywhere, something no other aircraft can do. Whooping crane chicks recognize the first thing that nurtures them as a parent. It's called imprinting. To make sure that they imprint on cranes rather than humans, the biologists and ultralight pilots wear unique costumes and use hand puppets to fool the chicks. Ultralight aircraft were chosen specifically to teach the whooping cranes how and where to migrate. They fly the same speed as the birds. And the open cockpit lets the pilots and birds keep a close eye on each other. But most important, the cranes have established a relationship with the ultralight itself.
We always say the birds are imprinted on the handlers and conditioned to follow the aircraft.
Now in the second year of Operation Whooping Crane, the pilots are planning to lead 17 juveniles south to Florida. Today, there's only one flock of migrating whooping cranes flying from Alberta to Texas. At any moment, a single storm could wipe them out. The reintroduction of this second, eastern flock is key to the crane's survival. And based on the success of year one, everyone here is optimistic.
Our first year with whooping cranes, it was a migration was 1,250 miles. When the birds returned on their own, they came right to the field where the pen is. They landed right on the field where they were raised. There's some homing instinct that brings them back there, and we don't really know the mechanics of that yet.
While they're in costume, the reintroduction team doesn't speak a word. They need to keep the whooping cranes as wild as possible, and never seeing a human face or hearing a human voice does help. So far, biologists have found that the returning whooping cranes are remaining wild and elusive. Finding the cranes within the wildlife sanctuary is a challenge for researchers who want to monitor their movements and behavior.
5 of the released whooping cranes from last year came back to this refuge, and all of the birds are, since they've come back, have started to do what we think are good behaviors for cranes. They're roosting in water, they're finding enough to eat, they're relatively wary of humans and vehicles, and so that's very encouraging in terms of whether or not they're going to start reproducing.
Whooping cranes in the sky is a sight not seen in northeastern North America for almost 100 years. For the pilots, preparing for the migration flight is intense. To stay finely tuned and ready to fly, the ultralights require constant maintenance of their GPS navigation systems and radio communications.
I guess we've perfected the methodology in leading birds. Over the years, we've faced a million problems and found a million solutions. And the design of the aircraft has been slowly modified over the years. We've gone from calling the Canada geese with our "come on geese" calls to calling the cranes using actual digital recordings of the birds. We've developed better bird guards to help protect the birds from injury with the aircraft. We've developed quieter propellers. That's all evolved over the years.
It's taken months to train the whooping cranes to fly behind the ultralights, while the migration itself, from Wisconsin to Florida, lasts about 50 days. It's a difficult journey, but in the end, the effort is worth it.
You get a feeling of almost feeling the bird on the wingtips. You can feel when it's out there flapping its wings. The vibration comes through to your arms. You can feel it. You can see it. The senses are kind of awakened, and so you're a little bit more alive to what's going on around you.
Whooping cranes are still one of the most critically endangered bird species in the world, and the secrets of migration remain a scientific mystery. But for now, the innovative use of ultralight aircraft technology is helping to bring whooping cranes home to the wild skies of North America.
You look out and you see these birds that have been around for 9 million years, have come so close to extinction, yet they're here. This is a bird that came as close to extinction as you can get and still survive. And we have an opportunity to save it.
Throughout human history, the bat has been a creature of myth and mystery. Hunting only at night and sleeping in caves during the day, their clandestine world is the stuff of Gothic novels, comic book heroes, and not much else. In fact, almost nothing is known about the real life of bats. But now, new thermal imaging technology is allowing scientists to study bats for the first time in their own wild world. Thermal imaging registers heat, and it's revealing secrets the human eye is incapable of seeing on its own.
All of a sudden, all sorts of things are possible that weren't possible before. What I've seen of the thermal imaging is that it's going to allow us to answer questions that we couldn't even dream of answering before.
Despite their small size, some species of bats can live an incredibly long time. Why has always been a mystery. But some suspect the secret of longevity is hidden in its body temperature. Bat sex is another mystery. They seem to live in a world of free love, where each bat mates with any other that's available. Genetic evidence suggests there's an order to this orgy, but no one knows for sure. Thermal imaging may solve these mysteries by recording bat behavior in total darkness.
All objects above the temperature of absolute zero naturally emit heat, and these cameras sense that heat. The active bats are showing up as white, meaning they're showing up hotter than the walls of the cave. And the really active bats, the ones that are flying around, are showing up even warmer than the ones that are lighted on the wall.
Now that it's possible and practical to study bats in their natural habitat, thermal imaging cameras are being used to understand why body temperature is key to their incredible lifespan.
The little brown bats that are so common at this location, it's an 8-gram animal. 8 grams, and yet the age record for these animals is over 30 years at, sort of life in the wild. So they must have something going for them.
In human years, the average age of these tiny brown bats exceeds 5 centuries. Scientists knew these bats were longevity champions, but they didn't know why. Thermal imaging has revealed that when bats hibernate, they don't just sleep, they almost die.
Bats generate body heat. Even when they're hibernating, they generate a very small amount of heat that can be detected by the cameras. What was astounding was just how cold their bodies can get, and thermal imaging provided the answers to that.
Well, one of the mysteries about bats, in a way, is how bats deal with winter. You can go into hibernation sites in the winter, and it was astonishing to discover last winter with a thermal camera that the bats were actually colder than the stone of the mine or cave in which they were roosting, and we didn't really expect that.
Thermal imaging shows just how cold the bat's hibernating sleep really is. Perhaps it's a lesson for humans who want to live a long time. Simply lie down on a bed of ice and wake up in 100 years. But as thermal imaging has also revealed, the secret is, after waking up, you have to warm up.
As they warm up, we see the brown fat tissue acting like a little thermal engine, heating their whole bodies up. And gradually their bodies come up to temperature, and then they fly away.
Unlike bats, humans are incapable of seeing in total darkness. And until recently, scientists relied on elaborate photography systems to capture images of bats in the dark. When they crossed an infrared beam, a flash was triggered, and a split second in time recorded.
The pitch black, all of a sudden, bang, the flashes go, and you see all the detail of the bat frozen in space. And I have yet to meet anyone who doesn't find that quite mind-expanding.
But older technologies offer only a glimpse of the bat's real world. Thermal imaging is capable of revealing intimate, real-time details like how do bats choose a mate? Until now, no one had a clue.
When you watch bats mating, there's no rhyme or reason. A female mates with several males, males mate with several females. It's a mating system that appears to be random and promiscuous. And yet, the young are more closely related than their mothers. Well, that suggests that a few males are fathering many of the young. So there is some mechanism for choice. My theory, which is just good old armchair biology, is in fact that perhaps they're picking hot males. And perhaps, you know, if you're really hot, you're much more attractive. You perhaps are viewed by the female as being better. We'll see. With the thermal imaging camera, we can perhaps actually find out.
Once hidden deep inside the Earth, observing the secrets of this mysterious creature now has nothing to do with shining new light into primordial darkness. Thermal imaging has exposed the natural world of the bat by taking pictures in shades of hot and cold. In the future, this wild technology will answer many more questions about longevity, hibernation, and perhaps even our own desire for immortality. The rugged west coast of North America is home to the majestic bald eagle, one of nature's greatest wild icons. Out here, they're the kings of the sky, but some people, it seems, still like to shoot them.
When I first saw the eagle and saw how its beak was blown off like that, I felt that maybe the most humane thing would be to have it euthanized. It looked that bad.
Robin Campbell's seen a lot of inhumanity in his time, but he refused to quit on this bird, although he knew he had a big problem on his hands.
Did they get fungus or like...
Here he is here, Dr. Andrews. I don't know what you think.
An eagle's beak is made up of the same protein as human hair. In normal conditions, it grows continuously, and in most cases will heal itself. But the bullet had completely destroyed this eagle's ability to regenerate its beak. So what did Robin Campbell do? He called his dentist.
I'd phoned a number of dentists and denturists, and none of them could help me. But I put an ad in the paper, and I actually had 15 different clinics call, one as far away as Alberta. And we chose Dr. Andrews. We thought that he was the best to work on this bird. We see a little...
No one had ever built a new working beak for an eagle. But if Dr. Andrews didn't try, and quickly, the eagle would die.
That's really good.
The challenge was to construct a beak strong enough to let it eat, but still allow it to breathe.
Any problems? You don't see really any growth?
When he went to feed, this part of the beak, when he bites hard, it bends the beak back into his skull here and puts exquisite pressure on there and probably gives him a considerable amount of pain.
Dr. Andrews, too, had seen a lot in his time, but an eagle in the dentist's chair? He soon found out, however, that working on the bird was only as difficult as working on a human patient with a really big nose.
This is a plaster cast, very similar to what I would make if I was making a denture for a person. These materials and techniques are precisely what we use with doing day-to-day dentistry. It's just that we've had to apply them to a different type of project.
Soon enough, they got it right, creating a beak of light acrylic and breathable chrome.
I'm not left-handed, but...
As if he knew what they were doing, the eagle remained calm throughout the procedure.
When we cast this and polished it, Fred Leake, the technician, he made sure that it's just razor sharp along here. So when he incises things, he cuts them off extremely readily.
All done on volunteer time, this original collaboration not only built an innovative beak and saved an eagle's life, it created world experts in the new field of wildlife dentistry. The beak even inspired a name for the eagle.
Someone came to me and they said, well, what's the name of him? So I just said, well, his name's Brian. He kind of thought it was funny that I would name him that, but I can't think of a better man than Dr. Andrews to name it after.
Brian the bald eagle will never return to the wild, yet he'll always be an icon, part of the new way technology is affecting the natural world. But as it turns out, Brian's not unique. On the opposite side of the Rocky Mountains, wildlife dentists are also working hard to save elephants. Calgary, Alberta is about as far from home as an Asian elephant can get, and it was here that another wild tech breakthrough occurred. West of the Mississippi River, the largest land mammal in North America is an Asian elephant called Spike. Weighing in at about 12,000 pounds, he was happy living at the Calgary Zoo, often getting pedicures from his keepers. Happy, that is, until he broke one of his massive ivory tusks.
Well, originally Spike broke his tusk by playing with his toys, and what eventually happened is just that this whole part of this tusk broke. And what we tried to do was cut this off at one point here. You can see where we tried to cut it off, and then found out that it was cracking even more, and we finally had to take it off right at this point here.
An elephant's tusk is just a big tooth. If the crack in Spike's tusk continued to extend back into his skull, he'd feel excruciating and perhaps life-threatening pain.
So there was some urgency to find a way to repair this, or at least to try and minimize the amount of damage that he could do to this tusk again.
The zookeepers decided that the best way to control the crack was to put caps on Spike's tusks. But they needed something bigger and with a more precise fit than the circus-style caps that were available. They needed Spike-sized tusk caps, but they didn't know how to build them. A local technical college was their first stop for advice. Teachers and students volunteered to build the first ever custom-designed tusk caps. Normally, they learn to design and build heavy industrial machinery. So making an elephant tusk cap was an exciting new challenge.
The biggest problem for us, the technology side of it, was that it wasn't round. It had a taper on it and a curve in it. So we were really at a loss as to how to get the actual shape of the part that we wanted to build.
Unique design problems demand a trial and error process, and before deciding on which material to use, the technicians needed precise measurements of the elephant's tusks. An early model didn't fare too well when the keepers tried to put it on.
They had tried to fit this wooden prototype onto the elephant, and Spike didn't think much of that. And the elephant sort of wrapped its trunk around a piece of wood and pulled it off itself. Put it onto the ground and stomped on it, and then picked it up, put it in its mouth and chewed it and cracked it, and we could hear this cracking sound. And there was all our prototype being eaten by the elephant.
Using computer models, they soon got the tusk design right. And to be strong enough to withstand Spike, they decided to build them out of stainless steel.
We wouldn't have been able to manufacture this cap unless we had some sort of computerized machine tool to do it. And it programs a tool path, and the cutter moves automatically through the whole process.
Those tusk caps are going to be on there pretty much for life. It's always the long-term answer that we're really worried about. I mean, tusks, or Spike's still going to play with his tires, and he's still going to put a lot of force on his tusks. And I mean, that's going to be the real test, is whether they can surpass the 12,000-pound elephant test here in the long run.
Today, Spike's been saved from the world's worst toothache. Now he's not only the largest elephant around, he's also the brightest. And with the only stainless steel tusks in town, he's more popular with the ladies than ever before. At just 20 years old, Spike has a long and shining life ahead of him. Known as the chain of life, DNA is helping track criminals in the human world. In the wild world, it's tracking animals in amazing new ways. Nature's detectives are next. In the past, scientists used radio signals to track wildlife and needed to trap or tranquilize their subjects to attach a transmitter. But today, the same DNA technology that police around the world use to chase criminals has become a new hands-off way to track animals. In a unique case study, scientists in a lab northeast of Toronto are following the endangered swift fox half a continent away on the Great Western Plains.
using the same bits of DNA that are used in human forensic analyses in murder and rape cases, but we can now analyze them in swift foxes and get information about parentage, offspring relationships, and other kinds of relationships. You'd have to do a lot of trapping and radio collaring to come up with the same kind of equivalent data.
The swift fox is the smallest of its kind in North America. 100 years ago, there were thousands of them, but its prairie home was transformed by farming, and the swift fox began to disappear. By the 1970s, it became extinct in Canada and remains endangered in the United States. Today, the swift fox is being reintroduced to the prairies, and its future in the wild is being tracked using its DNA. Swift foxes could still disappear at any time, and so a non-intrusive tracking method is critical to their fragile survival. DNA analysis seems perfect. In the lab, geneticists extract DNA from hair samples. Each swift fox has a unique DNA profile, just like a fingerprint. But this profile not only identifies the individual fox, it can connect it to its entire family tree. In the future, this means that all scientists will need to do to monitor any wild animal species is to analyze its DNA profile. In it, they'll see clearly if an animal like the swift fox is breeding or disappearing.
The one thing that an animal never loses is its DNA profile. DNA really is the first information technology. Computer software people pride themselves on their IT, but really DNA is 1 to 2 billion years old. It does carry the information of life. And when we can get a sample of it, we have a record of who it was, or it may now look like an offspring of one of those animals that were released. So we're getting information from animals without ever seeing them.
2,000 kilometers away, biologists are getting swift foxes bred in captivity ready for their reintroduction onto the prairies. Hair samples are collected from each fox before they're released.
I mean, DNA is a very useful tool for us because it allows us to monitor the swift fox population in the wild in a non-invasive and humane manner.
So far, over 800 of these tiny foxes have been released, but many have died. It's an ominous sign that reintroduction may not be a success. As these biologists work hard to save the swift fox, DNA tracking is now crucial to its survival. In fact, DNA may be the only way to monitor the health of the entire population. No other method can accurately tell if the foxes are breeding successfully in the wild.
The monitoring is important. You need to know that these things are breeding. You need to know there's connection between the populations. While they're in captivity, they're not really a swift fox. We're keeping them, but the end point is clearly to allow them to fulfill their role within their ecosystem.
This year, the swift fox is being released onto the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. It's only a small piece of their vast evolutionary birthplace, but it's the best chance they'll have to thrive and multiply. Full of grasshoppers and ground squirrels to feed on, the great open plains themselves are the fox's best natural defense. This is big sky country, allowing them to see a predator coming for miles. They're left in their cages to readjust to the sounds and smells of their long-forgotten homeland. Soon enough, they'll be released. And when they are, they run quickly into the tall prairie grass. Well, some do anyway. It's a bit scary out there. These researchers are nervous too. High mortality rates means there's no guarantee these foxes will survive. But DNA technology will help them track either success or failure.
Without the DNA technology, it would be quite difficult for us to monitor the population as a whole. And it enables us to identify individuals, and we know then which individuals that we've released here have bred in the wild.
It was one of the success stories to this point in that the reintroduction effort has worked, and there are larger numbers. They're clearly reproducing in the wild. DNA is millions and billions of years old. And it's that thread from the origin of life. We need to conserve that.
No one knows if the swift fox will survive in the wild. We do know that New Age DNA tracking will let us know, and hopefully later, rather than sooner. Another important part of the wild tech revolution are satellites, tracking the state of the entire planet. Around the world, nearly 2 million different species are known to science. But as many as 100 million more are still out there, most of them alive and well in the microscopic world some call inner space. In the past, microscopic life could only be studied after it was killed and preserved on a glass slide. Now, an exciting technological breakthrough has created microscopes capable of viewing this world alive and in Technicolor.
For the first time, we can go inside a cell and see what's really going on inside a living thing without having to kill it.
It's a whole new view of life. These real-time microscopes can even record and store images outdoors, something previously impossible. Back in the lab, even more powerful models can actually see inside a cell with unprecedented detail. Inner space is now in plain sight.
It's always amazed me just how much life there is in a tiny little drop of pond water. All of a sudden you'll see a creature that you've never seen before, and you go and look it up in a book and realize that nobody's ever seen it before.
There could be 1 million species in a single cup of pond water, with new species discovered every time someone takes a look through one of these microscopes. Originally designed to view cancer cells in real time, they now show for the first time that all life really is interrelated.
So it's like you've gone full circle. You've gone from the very small all the way down into its internal core, and all of a sudden it looks like you're back out in space.
It's hard to believe that one of life's new frontiers can be found in a drop of water. But new visual technologies are revealing a world we've never seen before. The view from outer space is just as astonishing. And out here, another technological breakthrough is helping to solve a major environmental mystery.
For the first few days, when you look out the window of the space shuttle down at the Earth, you're just absolutely awed by the beauty of this beautiful blue planet down below.
Astronauts in space get a rare view of our planet, but satellites get an even closer look. Some of them, like remote sensing satellites, can take pictures of the Earth's surface from as high as 800 kilometers.
We're using remote sensing to see how changes in the climate and human activity affect our environment and the survival of wildlife species.
But now a Canadian remote sensing satellite has taken on a new role to stop an environmental disaster. Ocean tankers are dumping waste oil in Canada's Atlantic waters, just to save the few $1,000s it costs to have it pumped out in harbor.
Probably something like 300,000 birds are being killed every year out there from this chronic oil dumping. Every year off eastern Canada we have the equivalent of an Exxon Valdez, but it's happening over the horizon, and for most people it's out of sight and out of mind.
The Canadian Coast Guard sends planes out on routine patrols to catch the dumpers. But most captains pump out their bilge oil under cover of fog or at night. Until recently, it was only luck if an oil-spilling tanker was ever spotted. The search for oil-dumping tankers now begins thousands of kilometers away, where data from different satellites is received for processing into pictures. There are many different types of satellites orbiting the Earth, and each provides a different view. Some, like the Iconos satellite, provide unprecedented close-up images. Others, like NASA's Landsat satellite, monitor long-term changes in ecosystems. Most, like the NOAA weather satellite, are limited by the Earth's atmosphere. They get spectacular views of events like hurricanes, but none of them can see through clouds to what's happening on the surface of the water. But Canada's RadarSat satellite is different. It can see through a hurricane. In black and white images, the RadarSat satellite captures wind patterns a hurricane makes on the ocean's surface. Its ability to see through clouds, fog, even darkness, has produced a one-of-a-kind map of Canada and the first complete, cloudless map of Antarctica. It can also record images of oil slicks on the ocean's surface. A thick oil slick appears calmer than the water around it and shows up as a dark black streak on a satellite image.
RadarSat is set up in such a way that it can respond very quickly when you get an oil spill. Doesn't matter really much what else you thought you were going to do that day.
Now, when the RadarSat satellite detects an oil spill on the water, a Coast Guard plane is sent out within the hour to videotape the crime scene for use as evidence in a court of law.
Yes, good evening, sir. Speed Air 01, Coast Guard surveillance aircraft. We just flew across an oil slick directly astern of your vessel.
Speed Air 01, I have not been cleaning any holes or pumping out any oil. Over.
Roger, sir. Okay, we do have pictures and we do have video showing oil slick, a slick 6 miles in length, directly astern and in the wake of your vessel. Over.
Roger, sir. Well understood, but I'd like to reconfirm that there is absolutely no ballasting, deballasting, or any pumping out going on board my vessel.
Roger, sir. We have that, and just for your information, we will pass on what we have seen to St. John's Coast Guard Radio, who will forward the information on to Transport Canada Marine Safety.
In Newfoundland's cold winter waters, a seabird with even a spot of oil on its feathers can die of hypothermia. And there's only one way to save them: prevent the oil from ever getting into the water. The RadarSat surveillance program seems to be a success. It's helped the Coast Guard catch a tanker dumping oil, and both the captain and the shipping company are now being prosecuted in a Canadian court.
I feel really heartened. For most of my career, we've been seeing a problem getting worse and worse, and we haven't seemed to have the tools to deal with it. There is now hope of our doing a better job of conserving the populations of birds. I think that's really helpful and a hopeful sign.
It's astounding, really. You know, when I was in remote sensing when the Earth was young, you know, I've been there since pretty much before they coined the term remote sensing. Satellite imagery has really improved tremendously.
The wild tech revolution is helping us to understand and hopefully save the natural world. It could bring an end to extinction, and it is helping to return endangered animals to the wild. But even the best that technology can offer can't predict the future of our planet. To answer that question, we're on our own.
For millions of years, great storms have battered Canada's west coast. Here, life is the epitome of living on the edge and living with the weather. Now forecasters are tracking a new kind of storm that modern weather technologies have only begun to understand. And when they'll blow next remains a mystery. p.m., October 24th, 2001. The fishing vessel Kelly was 20 kilometers off the northern tip of Vancouver Island. The winds were storm force, but Captain George Newson wasn't worried. He and his crew had seen this kind of weather before. What they didn't see coming was a fisherman's worst nightmare.
It was around 12 midnight, and all of a sudden I awoke to a pretty big sort of a crash. Pushed myself sort of through the dark and up the companionway to see what was going on, and there George was standing at the wheel, and I said, "What's happening?" And he said, "We're in a hurricane." I figured something was definitely wrong, you know.
What they called a hurricane was in fact a weather bomb, a much more dangerous phenomena. Weather bombs form quickly, strike almost without warning, and can catch ill-fated sailors totally unprepared. The west coast of Vancouver Island is the ultimate edge. A speed bump on the rim of the largest, deepest ocean in the world. Out there, 8,000 kilometers due west, is Japan. The Pacific is known as nature's cauldron, and weather brewed in its mighty belly stops for nothing until it collides with this rugged coast. And winter can always be relied upon to deliver the worst of it. That's when cold Arctic air flowing south from the Aleutian Islands and warm tropical air flowing north from Hawaii clash 1,000 kilometers offshore to create the perfect recipe for perfect storms. From October to March, these massive weather systems form and flow constantly, dominating Canada's entire west coast with storm, even hurricane-force winds. Damage can be catastrophic. Roofs ripped from buildings, trees and power lines knocked down, and ships lost at sea. To predict when and where the wrath of God will strike next is the job of the weatherman. Owen Lang is a marine meteorologist at Environment Canada's Pacific Weather Centre in Vancouver.
Forecasting for BC is difficult, mainly because it is sitting on the edge of a large ocean, and it has very rich topography along the coastline. All the coastal mountains change the weather systems as they come onto the coast, so that we may all be seeing something on our satellite imagery offshore and on our computer models. But once they start interacting with the coast itself, it quite often it changes significantly, and so it's always a bit of a challenge.
In the last century, the weatherman's job has changed dramatically, evolving from a crude network of daily observations handwritten in logs to a complex array of high and low-tech tools that today form a worldwide meteorological web.
It comes from all over the place. It's quite a large collection. The actual organizing of the data is very complex, and it's sort of beyond me. It's like a maze if you try to follow all the data streams. It is really quite impressive.
Weather ships, aircraft, radar, weather balloons equipped with radiosondes, and weather buoys all record real-time climate and weather conditions, and then uplink the data to polar orbiting and geostationary satellites. Surface stations like Vancouver's Weather Centre download this data and then interpret it for their specific region. In the last 20 years, new satellite and weather buoy technologies have dramatically increased the accuracy of marine forecasts by filling in the information gap with even more frequent updates. Yet this complex, high-tech web still has holes in it.
In the middle, there is not much information other than satellite data. So we sometimes refer to this as the data sandwich. We have observations at the surface and high aloft, but not in the middle. And of course, that's where storms develop, is in the middle atmosphere to a large extent. So this missing data is critically important to us, and it's one of the reasons why we have special problems forecasting for the West Coast.
For fishermen especially, an accurate forecast can make the difference between dropping a line one last time or calling it quits for the day.
Do you know when you'll be going?
Owen Lang even has fishermen call him directly, looking for that extra bite of first-hand weather information. George Newson called Owen a lot.
That could make it a little bit lumpy.
George Newson was a third-generation fisherman. He was born a salty dog and loved his life on the sea. He was also known as a driven man, and when other boats headed for port, George would keep the Kelly out, hoping to catch the last of a weather window and the last fish. Paul Sport learned everything he knew about the sea from George, and over the past 20 years he too had seen his fair share of storms, but this year had been different.
It was one of those seasons the weather was really making it tough for guys to catch fish that year. The systems were coming in one right after another.
Jan van den Dries, another experienced fisherman and a family friend, rounded out the crew. As the Kelly prepared to depart, Captain George Newson knew bad weather was brewing, and at the last minute, he decided to hire an extra hand. Young, inexperienced Beecham Engelmark.
I didn't really realize where we were going. We were going deep. It was kind of offshore, you know, so close to 100 miles out, I think.
The Kelly left port well prepared, but George Newson, a sentimental, even superstitious fisherman, had forgotten one last important detail.
I didn't speak to him that day. It was a routine that we had to always resolve our differences and for me to kiss him goodbye. When he left for that trip, it was the only time that I recall not kissing him.
The 500 kilometers of Vancouver Island's west coast are wild, remote, beautiful. Tofino, one of a handful of towns on the island's west side, is a place you rarely end up in by accident. The 8,000-kilometer-long Trans-Canada Highway ends here. But Tofino does have a unique reputation for luring those searching for unspoiled simplicity. In the past, when winter turned her cold shoulder to the coast, Tofino used to be as quiet as any tourist town, but not anymore.
This is the perfect storm cruise. Amazing, the power of it.
That probably weighs 400 or 500 pounds, and it was just thrown up there within the last 5 days.
Today, the destructive fury of wind and waves has inspired a new breed of tourist, the winter storm watcher. One of the first to acknowledge the fundamental allure of storm watching was Charles McDermott. The son of Tofino's first doctor, Charles grew up watching Pacific winter storms.
Well, storms, I think, have a magical hold on people, especially because today so many people live in an urban environment. To watch a storm approaching from the southeast to see the waves building and the rain start first as a little squall and then pounding to driven by 80-mile-an-hour winds horizontally and 30-foot waves, well, that's an experience that lets people know Mother Nature still is in charge, and I think people relish that.
Charles left Tofino for college and then a career managing hotels around the world. But in the early 1990s, he and his family decided to build a hotel of their own. A hotel like no other.
Our family had a long-time dream to one day build the Wickaninnish Inn.
From the ground up, the Wickaninnish Inn was designed to showcase the drama of a Pacific winter storm. The Banks thought they were crazy, but the McDermotts believed bad weather was good business. And if they built it, guests would come.
It's supposed to be storm season, so we came down for that.
Most people go and lie on beaches in Florida or dream of that for a vacation, but storms are equally part of nature, and without them, you probably wouldn't have the sunny beaches anyway.
You know, for us, winter storm watching was part of the plan from before we started construction. It was part of the design. It was part of what we thought would make the place a great place to be. And so every view from every window, every angle was covered, every chance to see the open ocean, to see the storms at their best, to see the waves and see the beach and see and experience the rain at the same time.
Turns out the McDermotts were right. The Wickaninnish Inn was an instant success, enticing eager urban refugees to the ragged edge of nature without giving up the trappings of civilization.
You walk in out of nature and watch the storm roll in with a beautiful glass of Cabernet, and not much can be better than that.
But for some, close to the edge isn't close enough.
Secret spot. Yeah, the secret spot.
Jeremy Koreski and Raf Bruweiler get their adrenaline fix not by watching waves, but riding them. Born and raised in Tofino, they too could have left. But why would they? This is one of the best spots in the world to surf. But forget suntans and California dreaming. The surf's up here when the weather turns nasty, and winter storm surges deliver huge waves right to Tofino's front door.
Yeah, there's a good little wave right there. Head over there. Yeah, you basically got to be really dedicated to surf in Canada. You got to be willing to do it, put on your big thick wetsuit every day and jump out in the cold water, and but it's worth it after you get a good ride. It's all worth it.
To find the perfect wave, Raf and Jeremy depend on the same technology as the weatherman. Accessing data from weather buoys and satellites, they can track ocean storms as far as 5,000 kilometers away.
5 or 6 feet for tomorrow. 3 days, it's going to be big. Good.
When this storm surge hits Tofino, it could mean walls of water 20 feet or higher.
Check the period.
A challenge big enough and tall enough for any surfer.
Typhoon.
Extreme winter surfing has even spawned a new business: extreme winter surfing videos. While Raf surfs, Jeremy floats inside the waves. And then takes a beating to get the best shots. In fitting fashion, Jeremy called his first video Numb. And so far he's sold almost 10,000 copies. The ocean here may be cold, but the surfing is hot. And it too has attracted a new wave of tourists who call Tofino the Malibu of the North.
It's getting pretty busy in Tofino here, and I don't really mind sharing waves. As long as I can get my share of waves, and I'm sure I always will be able to.
Knowing both the secrets of the storm and the best beaches helps Raf and Jeremy catch the biggest waves. It also keeps them out of trouble. But for those just passing through, if they're not careful, will often get more than they paid for.
people should not be going out right now. They're learning to surf, and it's not the best spot. You say, stupid tourists.
The big surf of the Northwest is seductive and dangerous. A failure to realize that only nature calls the shots here is a recipe for disaster. Dan Vidova is Pacific Rim National Park's public safety officer. Too often he's seen people gamble with the sea and lose.
Just a few years ago, we're 6 people who were caught by the first wave in that set from a storm system that was thousands of miles away. And a fellow got swept off the rocks and came into a surge channel just behind us. The group went down to try and help him when another wave came in and 2 more were killed.
In the past 30 years, 16 people who ventured too close to the edge have been dragged into the sea and drowned.
As incredibly beautiful as it is here, it can also be as equally dangerous.
But for West Coast fishermen, living on the edge is just part of everyday life. After a successful first run, the Kelly returned to port to unload its catch. October signals the start of storm season, and George Newson knew one was brewing just beyond the horizon.
George stayed in pretty constant contact with Owen.
Okay, George, I'm looking at the satellite imagery now, and the system is developing out offshore. It's definitely heading your way.
From what I gathered, I knew there was some pretty stormy weather coming along.
George Newson had the best information forecasters could offer. Yet he still decided to return to the fishing grounds deep in the Pacific. So far, this storm was just another part of everyday life. The wild, wind-blown west coast of Vancouver Island is dangerous and deceiving. Just offshore and just below the surface lies the graveyard of the Pacific, the final stop for an amazing collection of trawlers, freighters, and passenger liners, all caught in the fury of a Pacific storm. The steamship SS Valencia was one of them. On January 22, 1906, 117 people drowned here within sight of land. Tom Patterson, the lightkeeper at nearby Cape Beale, watched the disaster unfold and quickly sent a telegraph. Soon rescue ships were steaming to the site, but it wasn't soon enough. Cape Beale's lightkeepers have come and gone, but their duty has remained the same. Guard the light and keep a sharp lookout for the next victim of the Pacific's notorious graveyard. Norbert Brand has kept the light here, the oldest lighthouse on this coast, for 27 years.
Sometimes when a storm comes and it's predicted and it's brewing here at Cape Beale, you can almost feel the souls, the lost souls, I call them, walking.
Perhaps only a lonely soul could sense the spirits here. Cape Beale is one of the last manned lighthouses on Vancouver Island's west coast. Budget cutbacks and automation have replaced the keen eyes of a keeper with computerized beacons and weather stations that monitor wind speed and direction, but not much else.
The mariners have always told the lightkeepers in the past that a human presence is definitely a plus to them, to feel there's somebody out on land by the light, watching over them, you know, looking over their shoulder, kind of like a guardian angel almost.
Cape Beale is strategically located on Barkley Sound. Winds here have been recorded at almost 180 kilometers per hour, battering ships at sea, even the lighthouse itself.
When a storm comes in and the sea changes, the sound changes, the color changes. Actually, even the Cape Beale granite starts vibrating, and the sound actually goes right through the bedrock, and you can almost feel Mother Nature just changing and telling you something is happening.
Years of experience have given Norby an almost uncanny sense of knowing when a storm is brewing. But even he can't predict the most dangerous storms of them all. The ones that blow up so fast they seem to explode, just like a bomb.
You know, you could be sitting there and your pressure on your barometer in the boat is not doing anything, or maybe it's even rising slightly, until the ridge passes by and then the low gets closer. Then all of a sudden the pressure will drop dramatically, and at that point onwards everything happens almost instantly.
By definition, a weather bomb is formed when cold and warm air collide rapidly while creating a weather front. If the front develops into a low which deepens, in weather speak, to more than 24 millibars in less than 24 hours, the result is a swirling miniature hurricane, hard to see coming and even harder to predict. Science calls it explosive cyclogenesis, and the weatherman, a weather bomb.
Especially with our data void upstream, we sometimes miss the important details when they're small scale. We're gradually improving in our ability to predict these, but generally speaking, it's the small marine bombs which are the more dangerous ones, because typically we can't predict them quite as well.
In late October, there was a low developing out offshore, and it did actually deepen to qualify as a very strong bomb. George Newson on the Kelly knew the low was developing. I think it was a matter of timing. You know, there's little warning until all of a sudden they're upon you, and then it's almost too late.
You could hear the waves. They sounded like thunder. And then the boat took a hard roll to starboard. Things were pretty chaotic. Beecham came up into the wheelhouse and
I said, "What's happening?" And he said, "We're in a hurricane." Then it kind of all started dawning on me that some water coming in the companionway door at the back of the boat by the galley.
A second wave washed over the Kellerlee's stern, swamping it. As the boat began to sink, George Newson had time to make a mayday call and then abandon ship.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the Kellerlee.
His mayday was received and quickly passed on to the Rescue Coordination Center in Victoria.
Roger, what is your position, course, and speed?
And immediately, Coast Guard and military search and rescue teams sprang into action. Just around the corner from the Cape Beale Lighthouse is the Canadian Coast Guard's first line of defense on the Pacific. Born of history and necessity, the Bamfield Lifeboat Station has one mission that rules all: saving lives. And when the worst that West Coast weather can offer forces even the hardiest sailors into port, the Coast Guard heads out to sea. This highly trained team of rescue specialists is on constant standby to answer any distress call.
Well, there's a fair amount of traffic in this area, and the weather is fairly extreme. And if people do get in trouble out there, it's nice to know that there's someone here that can come out and help them. And that's what we're here for.
The Coast Guard has called Bamfield home since 1908, a direct result of the Valencia disaster 2 years earlier. Bamfield was the first station in Canada to use motorized lifeboats. Today, intense training and high-tech tools are their preferred weapons to battle the weather.
Rubber in the water. Okay, going in.
Team members come from a variety of backgrounds. Rescue specialist Steve Oakes had a previous life in the military, while Don Amos has spent his entire career with the Coast Guard.
Oh, it's a good feeling to go out and help people out, you know. I love being on the water. I'm from the West Coast, so I'm a lifer here.
And life as a rescue specialist on the jagged edge of the Pacific means working in some of the angriest weather on Earth.
You get out in 30-foot seas out there, and it's an eye-opener, because you're up and down and sideways in every direction. I don't want to go out in anything worse, but I will. If we have to, we will.
To combat the power of the Pacific, the Coast Guard depends on fast, flat-hulled, inflatable Zodiacs for coastal rescue missions. But to go faster and deeper into the Pacific, they needed a new weapon. These high-tech, high-speed, aluminum-hulled 47-foot lifeboats were built to the specifications of frontline specialists like Steve Oakes.
I personally am impressed with this boat over what we used to have, which was a 44-foot steel boat, and it only did 9 knots. This boat can get us there a lot quicker. It does about 25 knots.
3 times faster than its predecessor, this state-of-the-art lifeboat has a key design element that helps prevent it from becoming another victim of the graveyard of the Pacific. If this boat gets swamped in heavy seas, it can right itself in just under 6 seconds. But the Pacific Ocean is a big beat to cover, one the Coast Guard can't do alone. So when it can't get there by sea, airborne rescue takes over. Canada's military search and rescue technicians, or SARTECs, share the Coast Guard's primary objective of saving lives. 442 Squadron, based in Comox on Vancouver Island's east coast, can deploy their SARTECs at a moment's notice. But rescue by sea is still the first line of defense, and the Coast Guard specialists in Bamfield are the best of the best. They're so good, they're now famous for their riot school, or rigid hull inflatable operator training. Teams from all over the world come here to learn how to operate Zodiacs in the toughest conditions.
We train a lot of different agencies, police forces, other government agencies, parks, U.S. Coast Guard, Canadian military, a vast array of different agencies.
Training, training, and more training. It's all in a day's work. Here, storms are just as certain as death and taxes.
You have to be prepared for the weather to get worse. And that's the way we look at things. We prepare for the worst scenario.
And on the night of October 25th, 2001, the worst scenario was happening. Caught in a weather bomb, the Kelly was going down. The crew scrambled into immersion suits that would protect them from the cold North Pacific. Beecham Engelmark grabbed a flashlight. On deck, they struggled to deploy their life raft. Finally, the 4 men jumped from their sinking ship. Beecham Engelmark never made it to the raft. And while the others tried desperately to stay inside it, waves kept flipping it over again and again. Once, when the raft surfaced, Paul Sport found himself inside, all alone. But in the darkness, Beecham found George Newson. George was wearing only a flotation suit that wouldn't protect him from the cold ocean for long. Beecham hung on to him tightly as the two drifted in the towering swells. Alone in the raft, all Paul Sport could do was search helplessly for his shipmates, who were floating somewhere out there. It was just after midnight, October 25th, 2001. George Newson's Mayday had set in motion a search and rescue mission that began at the Rescue Coordination Center in Victoria, British Columbia.
We got the call from RCC that fishing boat in distress somewhere north of Cape Scott. They got positioned, so I said, yeah, I'll accept the mission. We launched the crew.
The storm was producing gusts of up to 163 kilometers an hour. Yet the Buffalo still took off. Its mission was to search for survivors. Rescue would be the Coast Guard's job. The John P. Tully was already on duty, patrolling an area about 100 kilometers south of the Kellallee's last coordinates. When the Mayday call came in, Captain Paul Frost responded immediately.
Got a good position on it. So the normal procedures, you get the second engine online and head for the scene with all speed possible.
Problem was, the Tully wasn't a fast 47-footer. Its top speed was 7 knots and would take hours to arrive on site. The fate of the Kellallee's crew didn't look good.
Flew up there, did a cloud break over the water, flew to the last known position. The ocean was nothing but white foam, spray blowing off the tops of the waves. With that type of winds are probably at least 90 knots, which is about 135, 140 mile an hour.
But incredibly, shining like a beacon in the pitch black ocean below, they spotted a light.
And it was flashing, and it was doing other than just bobbing around. So we figured that we're making an assumption is a person in the water.
In fact, there were 2 people. Beecham was yelling and waving his flashlight at the aircraft above. He knew time was running out for George, who wouldn't survive the cold much longer, wearing only a flotation suit. As the Buffalo circled above, Beecham watched helplessly as George succumbed to hypothermia and died in his arms.
I held him tightly for quite a while, just in hope that maybe he'd kind of come back, but that wasn't going to happen. I decided to, release him from my arms because it was just too strenuous on me, mentally and physically.
The Buffalo had been airborne for 5 hours, and with fuel reserves now dangerously low, the crew had no choice but to break off the search. But before leaving, they dropped a radio transmitter attached to a marker buoy. It would drift at about the same rate as the survivors and help the aircraft home in on their location when it returned.
The plane had left just around when George had passed away, so those 2 things for me were just a total feeling of loneliness out there on this big sort of black sea.
But Beecham wasn't alone. Paul Sport was also in a life and death struggle with the storm.
You're inside the life raft and you're just like in a dryer, tumbling around. Like a couple times it left me upside down in the life raft, and I get kind of scared that I'd get washed out or felt kind of hopeless.
Being there, experiencing what the ocean was like, how violent it was, but how beautiful it was at the same time was an awe-inspiring experience. It really was, They were so big, I couldn't really wrap my mind around it. And all I could see around me is water all above me. I mean, it was the size was huge.
2 days later, 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 2 days later Incredibly, Beecham had survived almost 7 hours in the open ocean when, just before dawn, the John P. Tully arrived on site.
I just remember coming up and seeing something on the horizon, kind of lost it in between some swells, and then it came up, and all of a sudden I seen green and a red light, which marks port and starboard. I felt like I was saved, you know, I felt I'm gonna make it.
The only thing we saw was a light. That was one of the things that Beecham really did well, was that he had the presence not only to get his survival suit on, but he took an additional flashlight along, so as well as the light that's on the suits, he had a flashlight, waterproof flashlight.
The Tully's crew could see Beecham, but could they rescue him? A Zodiac was launched into the raging sea, a dangerous challenge. But training paid off. The Zodiac zeroed in on Beecham's flashlight beam and hauled him to safety. But was Beecham the only survivor? At 4 p.m., 16 hours after the weather bomb had struck the Galilee, a buffalo spotted Paul Sport's life raft. It had drifted over 100 kilometers in the storm, but Paul was still inside and now waving to the aircraft above.
I heard him fly overhead, and I heard him start to circle, and I thought, hey, there he is. He's finally here.
But Paul's ordeal wasn't over yet. Only a helicopter could save him from the angry sea.
It seemed to take quite a while, but eventually the helicopter came. They sent a frogman down. Asked me to leave the life raft and get in the water. And then he went underwater, put the harness that goes around your waist, and the hoist pulls us both up at the same time.
While Paul Sport was hoisted to safety, the Coast Guard was retrieving the bodies of Jan Vandendries and George Newson. Luck, skill, training, and the will to live had all combined to make this rescue a bittersweet success. On the same fall day in 2001, George Newson and his friend Jan Vandendries were buried in Comox, British Columbia. Today, the survivors of the Galilee disaster are still coming to terms with the weather bomb that killed their mates.
It's just unbelievable for a guy like George to be gone.
For Paul Sport, a fisherman for 20 years, 16 hours in a life raft changed his life forever.
I don't think I'll ever go back on the water again. I don't know why. As time passes, it's kind of nice because it eases the pain of what went on.
Now Paul intends to spend the rest of his life with his feet planted firmly on solid ground. He has a new and much safer job and plans to spend a lot more time with his wife and kids. 7 hours in the raging open ocean rubbed off on Beecham Engelmark too. He touched the void and lived to tell the tale.
How do I feel about the ocean now? I'm really comfortable with it, you know?
Today, he and his wife Amy are almost finished restoring a vintage schooner that will be their new home. Beecham doesn't fear the sea, just respects it and life in a new way.
In a sense, I do feel like I kind of looked death in the eye, I guess you could say. You know, it was that close. You know. You want to take this? I'm gonna check the weather.
The loss of the Galilee and 2 of her crew was also felt at the Pacific Weather Center in Vancouver.
I was deeply affected by it, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he was working on my forecast, and I couldn't help but be significantly impacted by it.
Owen Lang had forecast the weather that day to the best of his ability. But today, he still struggles with a sense of accountability.
At George's funeral, I met one of the fellows who survived. And I went with a hope of sort of bringing some sort of solace to my my state of soul, sort of thing, I guess you could say. Not really expecting that I would do it, but I spoke to Beach, and he said something to me which was important for me.
I remember saying to Owen, you know, you're not the weather, you're just the weatherman, and that you did what you could do, and you know, we made our decision to do what we had to do, and events turned because they just did, you know.
George knew that, and he didn't blame me for that, and that I found that comforting.
In the age of sail, sudden, ferocious storms off Vancouver Island's west coast were considered freak incidents. Their explosive wrath just another part of life on the legendary graveyard of the Pacific. Today, meteorologists can observe and study the weather bomb phenomena scientifically, but they still can't accurately predict when or even if they'll explode. For now, this graveyard stays open. And on the open ocean, countless vessels, oil tankers, cruise ships, and hundreds of fishing boats like the Galilee stay tuned for daily marine forecasts. But like the one given to George Newson, they too remain only a very educated guess. Even with constant technological advancements, forecasts are only about 80% accurate. Out there, the data void still exists. And so, around the world, efforts to improve the weather network and to decipher the amazing complexities of our Earth's dynamic atmosphere continue. Today, 12 countries, including Canada, have joined forces to breach the void in the vast Pacific Ocean. Even a 1% increase in the accuracy of a forecast could save billions of dollars and countless lives. Due west of Vancouver Island, a storm is brewing right now. While Norbert Brand maintains his lonely vigil, high atop one of the last manned lighthouses on the island's west coast. Next door, at the Banfield Lifeboat Station, Canadian Coast Guard rescue specialists continue to train for a Mayday call that could come at any time. And in Tofino, a new breed of storm watchers, either in the comfort of the Wickaninnish Inn or out in the break zone, keep their own sharp lookout for the next big wave rolling in from Japan. Out here, on the raw, extreme edge of our world, the forces of nature are too powerful to ignore and sometimes understand. Beautiful, but dangerous, Pacific winter storms humble and fascinate us all. Here, and perhaps only here, you too can touch the void.
Thank you.